So the first thing that we did was to go up to the house in Ridgecrest to see what happened there. Not too much the first shake. A few things fell down. There was a broken piece of glass in the dining room. F-17 model fell off the shelf. A couple of champagne glasses from the top shelf in the kitchen fell down and broke. But all in all, it was a pretty minor catastrophe at that point. And a glass shelf fell down on the computer desk, but didn't break. And some cracks around the garage door up by the corner of the frame. And displaced some of the cinder blocks that are around the fire ring. And also some uncemented cinder blocks used as a retaining wall. And a few more things that just fell down in the house in random locations. Nothing major. Opened the doors on the china cabinet. Next went to an out-of-town friend's house to see what happened. The major thing that we found in their house was around the garage door, where towards the corners and the base there was some pretty significant cracking in the stucco work, and you could see pieces of the crumbled stucco on the ground. The rest of the house did fine, but the garage door area did take a hit. By 3 in the afternoon, an emergency command post had already been set up in front of the Ridgecrest Community Hospital with plenty of out-of-town fire and emergency vehicle responses. And it turned out that actually a portion of the hospital had already been closed because of damage to one wing. Out-of-city and out-of-state news started arriving from all over the country and even the world. California Highway Patrol and other cities' police departments staged in front of the police department in the city of Ridgecrest. So here's some shots of the news people all showing up. So here you can see a curved, unreinforced cinder block wall that shed some of its blocks. So it's now about 6 o'clock in the evening, and I decided to go see where the fault lines were running. The first quake slanted from the China Lake Naval Weapons Center, slanting to the southwest towards just outside the east end of town. Most of the fault was on the base, but a little bit of it crossed out into the area just to the east of town. So here's a sequence of shots where I was following the fault line along. And remember, this was the smaller quake and had smaller fault ruptures than the 7.1 that would follow later in the day on July 5th. Here you can see where our telephone pole's shaking, and also the earth movement kind of left a void around the telephone pole. You can see the road repair crews have already been through to repair the road. There were some utility crews that were out there repairing ruptured pipelines where they crossed the faults. This was towards the end of the fault rupture, so it wasn't just a single slip. It was kind of spidering out in different directions, as fault ruptures tend to do at their ends. So there wasn't just one crossing or one fault line. There was a spider network of various size fault ruptures that were spreading out from the end. In some places it was only horizontal slips. In other areas you had a little bit of vertical slippage also. In some cases what appeared to be a vertical slip was really just a hillside that got displaced, and that made it look like a vertical slip, but it really wasn't. In some places it was fairly decent size. I wasn't the only one out looking at it. This is looking onto the Naval Weapons Center. One of the interesting observations is there was some old tufa towers that intersected with the fault rupture, probably from back when this was a lake bed. Here's the wash that heads towards Trona. And that was pretty much the end of the tour for this evening as the sun was setting. So after nature's alarm clock woke me up at 4 in the morning, later that day I decided to tour the town to see what there was to see. This is the local Stater Bros in Ridgecrest with a little bit of evident ceiling damage. So the ceiling tiles came down. A little bit more along the edges where the ceiling tiles came down, mostly at the edges of the store it seemed. Then it was on to look at more fault ruptures throughout the desert area. That's what the rest of the sequence will be all the ruptures through the desert area. There's another area where the telephone pole was shaking so violently that it dug a cavity around itself. Once again, this is towards the end of the fault rupture where it starts spidering out in different directions. So you had not just one single line crossing the road, but different lines crossing the road, some with minor displacement, some with more significant displacement. This was one of the minor ones. Looking at the trace back towards the epicenter on base. Another shot of the trace heading back towards the epicenter on base from the end of the rupture. In this location there was a little bit of vertical displacement. Towards the end of the fault sequence, it became hard to find the traces, and you'd find the trace would end, but then you walk around, you'd find it would resume on an offset location, 50 or 100 feet along the way. Here's another area where it crossed the road, separate branch of the spider network. This one had more significant lateral displacement to it, about a foot total, maybe a foot and a half. Here it was pretty evident what the offset was. There was an area towards the end of the fault where it appeared that the amplitude of the waves got magnified or overlaid, and it literally launched rocks off the desert floor and threw them along the way. And if there was any rock piles, it really had dislocation out of proportion to the magnitude of this 6.4 quake. Here you could see the rocks were launched across the desert floor for a significant distance. Just more of the rupture sequence. Towards the end, it really just started fading away into little spider cracks spreading out in the desert floor. This is about the end of where I could find traces. They disappear and then reappear. So I'm in this interesting little area that must have had a focus of the energy from the earthquake. You can see how that rock rock has been ejected and tumbled over. Another big rock that's been flipped over. This whole area right here got dislodged and tumbled down, even though this hill is not very steep. And I'll take you up in this direction. You can see there how the rock got tipped over, dislodged. There's a rock that was right there, and now it's there. Here's a rock that was there, got slid over to there. You can see how this one broke loose and got pushed over. I mean, this kind of looks almost like if you were standing here, you would have gotten thrown. Even though this was only a 6.4. So the energy I'm seeing here is out of proportion to what you would expect to see. There you can see a rock got thrown. And as I walk in here, basically all the rocks that you see that have a bright orange on them and a gray to the side, the orange is what was soiled down originally. And you just see that lots of things got moved around. This almost looks like here was a rock that got launched over to there. This kind of looks like this guy that was a big rock kind of got all pushed around. So yeah, pretty violent event happened here. The fault crosses a hilltop. All right, that's it. And a wildflower thrown in just for a bonus. Here you can see how some major sized rocks got thrown off of the hillside, even though the hill wasn't that steep. And of course I had to wear my Ridgecrest Has Its Fault t-shirt in honor of the event. It even got me in the newspaper. So that was pretty cool. And that was the end of this tour, and the end of my tour for the day. So, figuring that the excitement was now over, I decided it was time to head back to Palmdale to take care of business there. And was on the road almost at my house in Palmdale at 8 o'clock when the main event occurred. And I was really not aware of it because I was 100 miles away and on the road. Sat down at my computer, started working, when all of a sudden all my friends in Ridgecrest started ringing my phone off the hook about the big earthquake that just happened. Seeing it was a 7.1 and figuring that the house was now a mess, I decided I needed to do a U-turn and head back to Ridgecrest. So when I got home, I started to survey what was done in the master bedroom, bathroom, where you can see that something's got knocked off the counter and one of the fluorescent light covers came down and shattered. But that's as far as I got before I had some emergency calls from my friends who needed some help. And so I left the house. But just to let you know, there was a ton of broken dishes in the kitchen and in the dining room. And for the rest of the house, there was something down and broken in every room of the house. But just because everything else I had to do that night to help friends in need, I didn't end up taking pictures of it all. The most widespread and obvious damage from the earthquake were mobile homes that came off of their foundations, some of which caught on fire after the gas lines ruptured during their collapse. Some more scenes from around Ridgecrest. Here's a cinder block wall that fell down along Ward Avenue. Unreinforced masonry topped to the regular wall. This is what happened to my friend's TV when it fell over. A shot from the paint aisle in Home Depot. That would have been a bad place to be. Somebody's chimney is pretty well cracked. Some dislodged tiles on the restaurant cases. Typical kinds of cracks found in the structural columns of commercial businesses. Here the whole wall developed a crack, went through the windows and broke the windows too. An interior of the Dollar Tree or dollar store. More from the front of that store. Where some cladding fell down. And on the other side of the door, the crack continued and some glass fell down. Here's the crack. So Trona is a town about 20 miles east of Ridgecrest associated with borax mining activities in a dry lake bed. Even though it was a little bit farther from the epicenter, it suffered more damage because of subsidence in the ground, probably associated with the brine-infused dry lake bed that it sits on the shoreline of. The earthquake happened in the middle of the heat of the summer months, and the water system to Trona was down for over a week. This was an emergency relief station set up at the Trona High School, handing out water and other relief supplies. An example of compression along a roadway. An example of subsidence around a manhole. All the area to the left of the road sank by several inches. Close-up inspection of the homes showed lots of structure damage. Let's go on a fall walkabout. I could follow this for 30 miles if I wanted to. The problem is it crosses the boundary onto the China Lake Naval Weapons Center, so that would be the end of that. And you can see that has areas where there's lots of vertical uplift, and then areas where there's denata, right? It's quite variable. Here you can see that the offset across the road happened in steps, but it's easily about a approximately 2 to 3 foot offset going on across the road. Yeah. So like the earlier 6.4 quake, the 7.1 quake was epicentered on the base of China Lake, and only the tail end of the fault rupture exited the base boundary, trending in a southeasterly direction this time, away from the city of Ridgecrest, crossing the same road about 5 miles away. So the set of pictures you're seeing now is for the second fault rupture that was associated with the 7.1. Even off base, the cracks were a little bit bigger, the offsets were a little bit larger, but still it spidered off at the fault termination only several miles to the west of the 178. Here's the offsets at the base perimeter fence.